Hey, I want to talk about paddling tandem canoes solo, as well as putting 3 people in a boat, so some options for those things. Most people add a 3rd seat to a boat because they want to paddle tandem solo. And so let's talk about that first. A center seat is the best position to be in. And of course that's because if I sit in the stern seat, I've got all that boat in front of me to exercise leverage over the wind. So I get blown around a lot more because if I sit way back here, there's that much boat in front of me for the wind to catch. On the other hand, if I sit here, now I've got the boat trimmed. Here, of course, I'm doing the Papa Wheelie thing, woo! By sitting in the center of the boat, I've got the boat trimmed, but not only that, now I've only got, call it six-ish feet on one end and 6-ish feet on the other end from where I am, even though it's a 16'9" boat. So I've got this whole compartment that I can control, and there's not a lot of boat on either end of me. And so it works really well that way. We use an extra wide seat for these center spans. It's built beefier, it's a thicker seat, it's a stronger seat because it's spanning a wide area. It adds about 3 pounds to the weight of the boat. And then, of course, what happens? Now we lost the yoke out of the deal because we got the center seat. And so you've got to go with a clamp-on yoke. And that's pretty straightforward. It's the sort of thing, the clamps just go on. They work with any of our gunnels. They work with most other manufacturers' gunnels as well. So wood, E6 hanging up on the wall over there, or aluminum, any of them are fine. There is another easy option for those of you that aren't going to portage any long distances. So if you're not going to go to the Boundary Waters or Algonquin with this boat, but you're just carrying it down to the lake, from your car or across the street to the river that you live on, whatever, the other easy alternative, and I'm just going to set the camera down for a second, is to use the center seat as your portage mechanism. And so let's just pop it up and rest it on your neck or your head even. And basically the boat is just a little bit bow heavy this way because that center seat is back of center, back from where the yoke would normally be. And it's going to bruise, and I'll show you. If you've ever been fitted for a backpack, it's going to bruise the C7 vertebrae, that big bump on the back of your neck. And gradually you're going to beat that thing into submission. And over the years, it's not going to matter anymore that you got a center seat resting against it. But initially, it ain't going to feel too good. So it's up to you which route you want to go. And then notice that the center seat has a thwart right behind it. Once we take out the yoke, we got to put in a thwart to create structure. Note this boat only has 2 thwarts, and there's enough structure in it. But you can't just yank out a yoke and not have a thwart back there and put in a seat. So if you're going to do a retrofit, make certain you add that thwart back there. And so then every so often we get somebody who calls us up and says, hey, I want to be able to paddle a boat solo and I want to take a lot of stuff and I want a big boat. And so they say, hey, can I paddle that Northwind 18 solo? And you say, well, yeah, you can. In calm water, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the 80K and the Northwind 18 paddle pretty much the same in calm water in the sense of they don't get blown around at all. But the minute you get out into the wind in a boat this size, even compared to this size, 2 feet difference in length, or a little bit more actually, there's a big difference. And so don't think that just because you can paddle a bit, because you can put a center seat in a big boat, that it's a good idea to use as a solo canoe. The 16-foot boats, the Northwind 16, the Polaris, are so much easier to paddle as solo canoes. And then there are some other paddling options, are some other solo paddling options for tandem canoes. One of those is a kneeling thwart. The cool thing about the kneeling thwart is it doesn't take up any additional space because, of course, you notice what happens here is, look at how much gear space I've lost by putting in that seat, whereas here, it doesn't take up much more space than a thwart does, nor does it add much more weight than a thwart does. And so it's a really convenient option. The problem with it is it's not super comfortable for extended periods of time. So the classic example I like to give is if you're going to go to the Boundary Waters and you're going to do, you're going to paddle the full day, you're going to roll into camp in the evening, you're going to have some dinner, and then you might want to go, one of the two of you wants to go out for an hour or 2 or 3 hours to fish or just paddle around the lake or whatever while the other one hangs out in camp. The kneeling thwart's ideal for that. What it's not ideal for is a 3-day solo trip, because essentially you're stuck in a kneeling position, and that's not a huge area to have your butt planted on for long periods of time. This is certainly a more comfortable alternative, or that's a more comfortable alternative. And so those are the downsides and upsides of the kneeling thwart. Another option is bow seat backwards. So instead of facing this way in the bow seat, you're going to face that way in the bow seat. And the cool thing, of course, is bow seat backwards gets you closer to the center of the boat than the stern seat does. And so we're closer to having the boat in trim, but nowhere near having the boat in trim. We do bow seat backwards setups on the Northwind 16 and on the B16 because we've had so many requests. All the other boats, we put a thwart in behind the bow seat. These, we've done some extra reinforcements, fabric, Kevlar reinforcements to stiffen up that bow area. And essentially what's going on is the thwarts are the lightest way to create stiffness. Adding the cloth adds a little bit extra weight, but we've had so many people say bow seat backwards is what they care about, that we've done that on the 2 small boats that it's requested on the most. The great thing about bow seat backwards, of course, is it doesn't impact gear space. That's the wonderful thing about it. Doesn't add any extra weight, nothing like that. And occasionally we get some questions from people, especially about the Northwind 16, because the B16 is a symmetrical boat, but the Northwind 16 is asymmetrical, and they say, wait a minute, now didn't you just tell me all the good things about an asymmetrical boat in terms of the efficiency and all that end of things when I'm paddling it that direction? What if I turn it around? Isn't that going to defeat the purpose? Isn't it going to work like crap? And the answer is, if the boat is in trim, yes, it's going to work like crap. But the vast, vast, vast majority, 99.99% of bow seat backwards paddlers don't get the boat in trim. And if the boat isn't in trim, the asymmetry is voided. Asymmetry doesn't do any good if a boat's not in trim. You lose all the benefits to it. And so let's talk about what that really means. So I go 200 pounds and I sit in this boat bow seat backwards. A canoe is a teeter-totter, which means I have to put an equal amount of weight somewhere right around this area, 200 pounds, in order to trim the boat. Now, I can put a little less weight way out here, but of course there's not a heck of a lot of space to work with there. And you're probably not going to get anywhere near 200 there, so you're going to put some here too. And so if you fill this whole end of the boat with 200 pounds, which means you brought a crap load of gear, you're going to get close to trimming the boat. The other alternative is you can do dry bags full of water. A 40-liter dry bag, let's be optimistic and say you get like 8 gallons of water in it. 8 gallons of water, 64 pounds here, 64 pounds here, 64 pounds here. You got the boat in trim. Oh my God, that sucks to have to do. What most people are going to do is they're going to have a pack or two, and then they might have a dry bag with a little bit of water in it, and they're going to call the day good. And the boat's not going to be in perfect trim, but it's going to be fine, and then the asymmetry doesn't matter anymore. What we strongly recommend that you don't do is help your trim out with rocks, because rocks sink, and they sink canoes if you capsize. And so it's just a good habit not to use things that sink if you're ballasting your canoe with them. If you want to go with 3 people in a boat, the big boats are the way to do that, because I should step back for a second and say any 16 or 17-foot boat you order with a 3rd seat, this is what it's going to look like. There's just not enough space in a Northwind 17 even to have a 3rd seat in that configuration. The areas are just too tight for us to be comfortable with it. In fact, even that kneeling thwart is kind of tight in there. Although because you're kneeling, it works all right. So Northwind 18, B19, Northwind 20, the 3rd seat works great, and you still get to keep the yoke. But the way these boats more typically get used with that 3rd seat is a family or a 3rd person. And so here you got, let's say we got dad. We won't be gender. We won't do stereotypes. We've got dad, we've got the kids, and we've got mom. And so that's a frequent configuration for Northwind 18. A B19, now you can put 3 bears in it without any trouble. 3 bears with guts on them even in a B19 or even a Northwind 20. Any of those are totally fair game. And then there's one other thing that we do, and we don't do a whole heck of a lot of it, but it works pretty slick for families. And that is a camp rig. And a camp rig varies by model, but it's basically turn that yoke around backwards and put a seat in right in front of it. So now I've got kind of a tight compartment right here on a small boat, but plenty of space to have. Now we're going to be stereotypical, and we're going to say we're going to put mom in the bow because she's lighter often. She doesn't have beer gut. And then we're going to put the kids, and then we're going to put dad, and that way we've got the boat reasonably in trim. Now if we go with a bigger boat, what a camp rig is in a Northwind 18, for instance, it's still the same thing. We still switch that yoke around, but now when we do a camp rig, now instead, we're putting that seat about right there, so you've got some gear space behind it, and the kids are close to mom. Stereotypical again, I know. So that's the different options for getting either solo or 3 paddlers into a boat. Last couple of things to know. All of our tandems come with 2 seats. After that, it's a la carte. So if you want to do a 3rd seat in a Northwind 18, you can actually do a camp rig and a 3rd seat. You could do 4 seats in a Northwind 18 if you wanted to, although you wouldn't have any room for gear. And then the other thing is we do not have an E6 carbon center seat. So that E6 trim you see hanging on the wall over there, we can do seats. We can do bow seats and stern seats, but we don't have an extra wide seat in carbon yet. So that means if you order an E6 boat in anything like this or that, it's going to have a walnut seat. And with that, thanks for listening.